This begins media number 2. We're back on the record at 11:36 a.m.
Ma'am, are you ready to continue?
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, you'd used a term in our prior discussions. I wanted to make sure I wasn't confusing things. Is a bleed to the hepatic artery something you would describe as a colonic injury?
No.
Okay. And then with respect to Mrs. Meja, do you know if she continued to bleed at any time after this 4 p.m. conversation?
No.
You don't know one way or the other?
I was unaware.
Okay. Now, we were talking about the bylaws. You've told me about when Dr. Sade first brought that up, the concerns you had about her operations, the complications, the blood issue. Were there any other reasons why you didn't feel comfortable, even though Dr. Sade was saying the bylaws required you to take over the patient, that you haven't told me about now?
My only other concerns that I had was there was not a in-house intensivist.
And what was your concern there?
I feel for patients who are complicated or require more care, sometimes community hospitals aren't the best place for them to be at.
And why is that?
I feel, in particular, some of the nursing staff are not used to dealing with certain types of complicated patients.
Did you believe that was implicated in Mrs. Meja's case?
I have had conversations with certain ICU nurses and felt that they would not be able to take care of a complicated patient, and I have discussed that with the CNO.
Objection, not responsive.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand. Did you have the opinion back when Dr. Sade called you on the 27th of June, 2014, that the nurses in the University General Hospital's ICU might not be able to care for Mrs. Meja?
Yes.
Why did you feel that the nurses at the University General Hospital intensive care unit might not be able to care for Mrs. Meja?
Because of previous experiences that I've had with less complicated patients.
Okay. Can you describe generally what it is those previous experiences were? Let me strike that and start over. Were these previous experiences with nurses at University General Hospital?
Yes.
Were they experiences regarding patients of your own that you were caring for in the ICU setting?
They were in the ICU, but they weren't like sick, like ICU patients. There were times where they were just there because they weren't moved or whatever the case may be.
Were the experiences that you're referencing with the ICU nurses at the University General Hospital prior to Mrs. Meja, did those experiences lead you to have a concern about their ability to handle a case like Mrs. Meja's?
Yes.
Why? Why did you feel that way?
Because I've had much less complicated patients where there was issues with orders getting done properly.
Did those experiences lead you to feel that the nurses working in the intensive care unit at University General Hospital were not capable of doing the types of things you would have expected them to be able to do?
Not all the nurses.
Were there some that you felt were not qualified or capable of handling the kind of patients you expected to be in the intensive care unit at a hospital?
There was some, yes.
And what is it about them? I'm trying to get more information.
There were some that didn't even know what some basic orders were used for. For example, you start somebody on medication to treat diabetes and they weren't familiar with that medication. Or someone has a feeding tube and they didn't know how to manage that feeding tube.
So did you have a concern back in 2014 that nurses working in the University General Hospital's intensive care unit didn't know, some of the nurses didn't know basic things about medications and how they were to be used for patients in the intensive care unit?
To the form.
There were one or two that I experienced that didn't know what certain medications were used for.
Okay. Did you have concerns that the nurses working at University General Hospital's intensive care unit had other issues other than the knowledge of basic medications?
I had some issues with the knowledge of, as an example, how to use a feeding tube. Some of them did not know.
As a surgeon, did you have confidence in the nurses working at University General Hospital's intensive care unit that they would be capable of handling a complex patient?
No.
Why did you have that concern?
Just based on my interactions with the handful of nurses that I ran into.
Was this something that built over the time you worked at University General Hospital, or was it something that was immediately apparent to you?
It was almost immediate.
And why was it almost immediate?
Again, most of the cases I did there were through the emergency room. I did not bring elective cases, and the cases that I've done there, I had some concerns about my patient care from the nursing staff on the floor and in the ICU.
If you had the choice, if you had a loved one you were about to have to admit to an intensive care unit in a hospital, would you have put that person in University General Hospital?
Check the form.
No,
Why not?
I didn't feel that. I didn't feel like they would be able to get the type of care per se they needed. I felt like some of the nurses needed more education.
Did you express that concern to anyone at University General?
To the extent she's going to get into anything, that she get into peer review.
Let me
Proceeding
rephrase.
of any sort.
Right.
Yeah,
totally
instructed not to answer.
Outside of the peer review type discussion we had earlier, outside of that, did you ever express these concerns you're telling me about, the nursing staff being, some of the nursing staff being incapable of handling for patients in the intensive care unit, to anyone at University General?
Wait. I'm going to instruct you not to answer as to any peer review, any quality assurance, any physician committee or hospital committee interactions relating to quality assurance, peer review, morbidity, mortality, and similar types of confidential interactions. With that caution, you can answer his question.
Yes.
Again, outside of the instructions, who is it you relate that information to?
The CNO.
And do you recall who that was?
I think her first name was Emily.
And what led you to talk to the CNO, Emily, about your concerns about the capability of the intensive care unit nurses at University General Hospital?
From the care that I had from my own patients.
Was there a particular incident that triggered this conversation?
I'm sure, but I do not recall the exact.
Do you remember the time frame when this conversation came?
I remember speaking to her once, probably in April and May.
Of 2014, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall the response the CNO Emily made to your concerns?
She said that she would take care of it and, educate the nurses.
Did you see any action consistent with that?
No.
Did you continue to have this concern about the capabilities of the nursing staff through the course of your relationship with University General?
Yes.
Did it ever go away?
No.
Did it get better or worse or stay the same?
Stayed the same.
All right, so have we talked about all the concerns you had about the nurses or some of the nurses in the intensive care unit at University General Hospital, in your mind, not being qualified to handle patients like Mrs. Majia? Were there any other conversations about that we haven't talked about? Again, outside of the peer review instruction that your attorney gave you.
That's it.
I guess bad way of asking, other than Emily, were there any other individuals that you had that conversation with?
Outside the context of.
Again,
Yes,
right.
yes.
For all my questions outside the context of peer review, were there others other than Emily that you've told me about where you've had that same kind of conversation?
Yes.
Tell me about those.
It was with other physicians.
What did you talk about with other physicians in that regard?
The concerns with some of the nursing staff, not necessarily in the ICU, but in general.
Was this concern something that other doctors related that they had also? Or were you the only one making or raising this concern?
I wasn't the only one.
Can you give me your recollection of, was this a widespread concern or was this a small concern?
Well, the concerns were different for different specialties. But in general, some of the physicians that I spoke to also had similar concerns.
Would this have been, can you describe for me the population of doctors that were expressing this concern? By that I mean, were they all surgeons or were they spread over a range of specialties and performances?
They were spread.
Among this group, when you discussed your concerns about the capabilities of the nursing staff, was it a systemic concern or were there specific departments where there was a problem?
Based on my discussions, it sounded like a systemic.
Why was it your impression in your discussions with other doctors that they had a concern about a systemic problem with nurses at University General Hospital?
Because it wasn't in just one area.
What do you mean by that?
For example, it wasn't just ICU nurses
What was it?
or OR nurses or floor nurses, you know. It was, I mean, like I said, it was kind of a wide range. We all worked in different areas and everybody had some type of complaint.
Were these complaints from other doctors something that happened, were they something you heard rather when you first started working there or at some other point in time?
When I first started working.
Was it something you heard right away or was it after being there a period of time?
Right away.
Was it something that changed over the course of your relationship with University General or did it stay the same?
Honestly, it's hard to answer that question because I started going to University General less and less as the longer so I don't know if it got better.
Did doctors ever relate to you that conditions had improved at some point in time. And by conditions, I mean with respect to their concerns about the nursing staff's capabilities.
I will say, I know the OR staff, the OR improved. I can
And
say
why
that.
is it you feel that way?
They hired more nurses, trained, and so I know, like, I've worked there, and then I had some colleagues that work there, and I know that did get better.
Okay. Was that before or after Mrs. Mage's care?
It may have been before. I don't recall.
With respect to the ICU, did that ever improve?
Or
I don't know, but I know there was at least one or two really good nurses, but they didn't always work.
With respect to the nurses involved in Mrs. Mage's care, do you know whether any of those are the, quote, good nurses that you were referencing?
I know there was one in particular that was good.
Who was that?
I don't recall her name, but she would have been the charge nurse during the day. She was a charge nurse during the day.
Do you know if it's Nurse Collins?
No, I think Nurse Collins was just a regular nurse. I don't think she had the title of a charge nurse.
Do you know anything about Nurse Collins?
No, I didn't.
Was she one of the good or the bad, or
I didn't know.
you didn't know? Okay, so to go back over any other discussions with others, you've told me now about the CNO, Emily, the general discussions you had with other doctors. Was there anyone else outside of the peer review instructions your counsel's given you previously with whom you discussed these concerns about the nursing staff at the University General Hospital being qualified or capable of handling their jobs?
No.
All right, so as to walk through, again, when we were starting on this, we were talking about this conversation regarding the bylaws with Dr. Sade. You've now told me all the reasons why you didn't feel comfortable in accepting his command to take over Mrs. Maja. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, you told me the second part of that was he made a rebuttal that it was in the bylaws that a surgeon on call has to take over. Do you remember that?
Yes.
What was it Dr. Sade said about the surgeon on call having to take over?
form.
He just stated that because there was a suspension, the surgeon on call had to assume care. According to the bylaws, is what he said.
Okay. Did he say anything else about that?
No,
What did you say in response?
I need to see the bylaws.
Had you reviewed the bylaws before?
No.
Did you review the bylaws that day?
Yes.
How did you go about reviewing the bylaws?
I had them emailed to me.
And what did the bylaws say with respect to what Dr. Sade had told you?
Not knowing word for word, in general, it stated that the chief, during a suspension, the chief of staff needed to find a replacement if the surgeon did not have an alternative.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
Who emailed you this information?
The CEO secretary, so at the time it was Erica Cleveland, I think was her name.
And where did she email you?
My personal email.
Do you still have that email?
I no longer have that email.
Did you ever print it out?
At one point,
Do you know what you did with the printout?
I do.
Where is it?
Another lawyer has it.
Other than Mr. Ryan?
Yes.
Who is that?
Lecter.
Who is lawyer Lecter?
He was representing me for the Texas Medical Board.
Do you know his first name?
Well, Darren Dest was the main lawyer, and I can't remember Lecter's first name.
Do you know how to get in touch with them?
Yes.
Do they have other documents like those emails?
Yes. They have the actual email. I sent them the actual email also.
And are they still engaged to represent you?
No.
When did that end?
Wait, hang on. I'll object.
Well, these are documents pertinent to requests for production we've made that apparently, ma'am, you still know how to get in touch with these lawyers? Okay, so we've made requests for production, Tim, on exactly this sort of thing. If she still has contact with these individuals and they have the actual originals, I don't understand why they haven't been produced. Would have had them here today. You know, we've requested all emails, etc.
Yeah, I know.
This hasn't been produced.
I know that too.
So can we get them today before we're done, or do we need to recess the deposition until we get all the documents?
I wouldn't recommend recessing. I've produced to you what has been produced to me.
Well-
And there's other information that these lawyers have that was submitted to the board that isn't pertinent, or not, it's not that it's not pertinent, it's what has been submitted to the board by these attorneys is not responsive or is privileged. As far as the email that Dr. Hamilton just mentioned about getting bylaws, I don't have it. They
Okay,
don't.
well, ma'am, you understand you're a party to this case, true?
Yes.
You're a defendant in this case, true?
Yes.
You're represented by attorneys in this case, true?
Yes.
You signed discovery responses indicating that you provided everything that was responsive, true?
Yes.
In her possession, custody, and control.
Custody and control means your ability to compel them to be produced. You understand that?
I did not.
Okay, if you'd called your lawyers and asked them to send you this information, would they do it?
If they still had it, I suppose.
Did you make any effort to find out if they still had it?
But I'm instructing not to answer.
Well, I'm building a motion to compel right now, Tim, regarding this, because first, you didn't disclose it. It obviously exists. Second, you didn't produce it, and I'd like to know what efforts were made to find it.
I'll be happy to have a conversation with you about this off the record, but I'm not going to put it on the record.
Well, I want it on the record because I'm here to depose her today.
I'm not going to let you ask her about communications that she's had with me or her lawyer, other lawyers.
The point, ma'am, is these documents were not created for peer review purposes, correct?
Wait, specify the document. or
The email that you're
instruct her
discussing
not to
today
answer.
was
Which
not
one?
created for peer review, correct?
Which one? Or I'll instruct her not to answer.
The email that you just told me about that you got the day of the phone call from Dr. Shad was not created for any kind of peer review, correct?
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay, it was sent to you after you made a request from Dr. Shad for the bylaws, correct?
He did not send them to me. So then I called the CEO. but-
Okay, you called the CEO, Erica Cleveland, who's not an attorney, true?
True.
Did not represent you in any kind of peer review or other kind of context, true?
True.
Who communicated with you on the day that Dr. Sade called you, June 27, 2014, true?
True.
Before there was any anticipation of litigation or even any idea that anything might happen to Mrs. Major, true?
True.
Wasn't done as part of your defense in any case to prepare for any response to any peer review or any other medical board. It was at your request, correct?
That was at my request.
All right. And it was done because you had a question, having never seen the bylaws, about what exactly was in them, true?
Correct.
This was not done so that you would know how to respond to a peer review or a medical board action, true?
Correct.
It was done to evaluate Dr. Sade's request that you assume Mrs. Mage's care. True?
Correct.
Sole reason that it was done.
Correct.
Okay. That email was something you received. True?
Correct.
You printed it out. True?
Or I looked at it on my email.
Okay, but at some point you printed it out and you provided it to other individuals.
I emailed it.
Okay, you emailed it. And those individuals were lawyers that you had retained to represent you in a medical board action. True?
Correct.
And those lawyers worked at your control and direction. True?
Correct.
You still maintain their contact information.
I have the email address.
And when a request was made to you for all communications regarding your actions on the 27th of June and on the 28th of June, did you make any effort to request that information from your attorneys?
The email?
Yes,
I'm going to
ma'am.
object and instruct you not to answer about communications that you've had with your lawyers.
Do you contend that this information was privileged from discovery in any way, shape, or form?
Objection for it.
Because it was used for the medical board, I thought it was privileged. Honestly, I don't know enough about it.
Okay. But this would represent
Objection non-responsive.
actual communications on the day of the conversation we've been talking about between between individuals that are not lawyers. True?
True.
Okay. That contain facts about what was communicated on that day regarding your actions relative to your decision about taking over Mrs. Mage's care. True?
Objection for it.
What was the bylaws?
Okay. Were there other emails that you sent back and forth regarding anything to do with your actions that day and Ms. Cleveland?
Objection for it.
Miss Cleveland, no.
Were there any other individuals that day that you emailed with respect to anything to do with Dr. Sade's call or your care of Mrs. Maja or your non-care of Mrs. Maja?
On June 27th? No.
On any other date?
Yes.
Objection
What
for it.
dates?
Wait.
Back to the peer review instruction.
Yeah,
Okay.
Same.
With respect to peer review, I'm never going to ask you about peer review. Here's my question. On the 26th, 27th, 28th of June, did you make any emails regarding Mrs. Maja or Dr. Sade's call to you about assuming her care, other than the one you've told me about with Ms. Cleveland?
Outside of peer review, I did send an email to the CEO.
Okay. When did you send an email to the CEO outside of peer review about this incident?
I think it may have been the 29th, maybe, or maybe the 29th. I don't recall the exact date.
And what was it why were you sending an email to the CEO? I'm assuming when you say CEO, the CEO of University General Hospital.
Yes.
Okay, why were you sending an email to the CEO of University General Hospital?
Because I was told by the CEO that the chief of staff was requesting my privileges suspended.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Well, I'd like to ask about this, and if you're going to assert a privilege, I'd like to just keep going.
I'm not. If you would do me the courtesy of letting me ask you a question off the record, I would appreciate it. I think it
All right.
I think it might save time.
Okay.
Off the record, 12:06 p.m. Back on the record at 1:22 p.m.
So, ma'am, are you ready to continue? We've taken a lunch break.
Yes.
Okay, and I wanted to kind of share with you, an Exhibit 2 is a copy of our request for production to your lawyers, and I don't know if you've seen that, but one of the things that was requested in there were emails that pertain to, in a general way, the events involved in this case. And I've just been given Exhibit 3, which appears to be one of those emails. Are you aware of any other emails other than what's here in Exhibit 3?
Outside of the one that we talked about before break, or?
Yes, ma'am.
I had requested a copy of the bylaws from the CEO, and he told me he would have his secretary email them to me.
Okay, so we have another email. This is not that email, correct?
This is not that email that she sent.
What is Exhibit 3?
Exhibit 3 is an email that I sent after I was told that Dr. Sade had requested my privileges suspended.
Okay. And who is the email to?
I sent it to the CEO, the CFO, and I don't know the titles of the other members, but they were all part of administration.
So more than the individual represented here? It's
Yes.
Chuck Schutz?
Yes,
And who is Mr. Schutz?
he was the CEO.
And how did you decide who to include in the list of people you sent this email to?
I just, in all of the administration that I had been in contact with in some form or fashion. I just felt that they should all know.
Okay. And this was, the date on here is July 1st, 2014. Is this the date that you created this email?
Yes, I'm assuming so.
And actually, it looks like there's a response. I always have this problem with emails, so it looks like going chronologically from the first page of Exhibit 3 is the latest, if you will, email. Then there's a response from the first entry is the last chronologically, which is at 7 p.m. Then before that, there's a 4:57 p.m. reply, and then there's a 4:52 p.m., which appears to be the initial email you sent. Is that the way this works?
Yes, it appears so.
All right. Now, there would have been, if we had been given the actual email, this would have included a list of the individuals to whom you sent it, correct?
Yes, I'm assuming. I don't know how these print out.
All right. And then, did anyone other than Mr. Schutz reply to you to this email?
Not via email, no.
Did some respond to you in other ways?
Verbally.
Who responded to you verbally?
Debbie Woods, and there was another male.
And who is Ms. Woods?
You know, I don't really know what her role was. I don't know if she was the president or... I don't know exactly what her role was. She did a lot of marketing with me and kind of my liaison, so...
And what did Ms. Woods tell you?
She essentially apologized for kind of what happened, as did the other gentleman, and I'm blanking on the name right now.
Okay. And then, is this response from Mr. Schutz the only one you've had from him?
Email?
Yes.
Yes.
Did he call you verbally on these issues? Or talk to you?
I think I
verbally?
talked to him in person.
And did he say anything more about this situation?
He also apologized.
Did you ever talk with Dr. Sade about this?
Tried to call him, and I left a message.
Did you ever send him an email?
No, I didn't have his email address.
So to go back, and what had what we had been talking about before the break was that after you had indicated to Dr. Shoddy that you wouldn't take over Mrs. Mazia's care, he said something to you about the bylaws, and we were talking about the bylaws being emailed to you. Then now that we're looking at Exhibit 3, this would be separate from that earlier discussion about the bylaws being emailed to you, correct?
Correct.
All right, let me come back to that. Let's keep going chronologically, though, back through things that happened in June 27th. Have we now talked about, well, let me back up. So the bylaws are emailed to you at some point in time, correct?
Yes.
Now, your Exhibit 3 indicates that you reviewed it with your counselor. Do you recall reviewing your bylaw with a counselor?
I did, but I'm not sure the time frame.
Okay, would that have happened on the 27th?
I don't think so.
Would it
I
have-
reviewed it on the 27th.
Did you review it with anyone else on the 27th?
No, not that I know of.
Was there something in particular in the bylaws where you said, as a result of reading it, I do not have to take over this patient?
Yes.
What was it in the bylaws you said you didn't, that you read, that you said supports your basis for saying, I don't need to take over this patient?
Form.
And again, I don't remember the bylaws word for word, but specifically Dr. Sade said it goes to the person on call. And it specifically did not state anything about the on-call person being required to take the patient of a surgeon who got suspended.
Was there anything else that you were basing your refusal to take on Ms. Mazia's case other than that?
Not according to the bylaws. Just the bylaws never stated that.
So, so I'm clear. It's because the bylaws did not state in your review of them that a doctor like yourself could be required to take over a patient. That's why you felt comfortable in refusing to take on Ms. Mazia.
Form.
The bylaws didn't state that the on-call person was required to take over a patient for suspension.
And
So
is-
that's why I felt comfortable stating that the bylaws does not state this.
Was the nuance then relating to a doctor being suspended?
It was related to requirement of the on-call surgeon.
Okay. And was that it? Was there anything else?
Form.
Not that I recall.
Okay, so at the time, back in June of 2014, were you serving at the hospital in a on-call surgical capacity?
I was on call for the emergency room.
All right. And at the time, back in June of 2014, did you have any kind of contractual or written agreement between yourself and University General Hospital regarding your services?
Yes.
At the time, back in June of 2014, were you being compensated by University General Hospital to provide on-call surgical services?
I was supposed to be.
Okay. Was that something that just wasn't happening?
That was
or-
something that was not happening.
Tell me about that. Why was that not happening?
I don't know.
Well, let me badly ask question. You had a written agreement. They were supposed to compensate you for this activity. Were you actually providing that service?
Yes.
Was University General Hospital not paying you for that service?
Not the whole time.
What time were they paying you for?
So, for example, I took call in April and I got paid in April. I got paid for April in June. At that time, I had already taken call in both May and June, and did not get paid for May or June.
So you did not get paid for May or June services, even though you provided them?
Correct.
Were you made aware of why you weren't being paid for those services?
They just said it was coming, more time. Contractors get paid, we get paid second, like after all the employees get paid, then the contractors got paid.
So this care took place June 27th, 28th timeframe of June. By that point in time, were you aware you were not being paid for June?
I was not, no. I thought that in July, I was promised to get compensated for June, sorry.
Okay. So by June 27th of 2014, when this phone call was made to you, had you an understanding of when you would be paid for your June services?
I was told mid-July.
Had you been told when you would be paid for your May services?
They told me it was going to be one lump check.
Excuse me, so you were told you would be paid for both your May services and your June services in mid-July, is that correct? Did you agree to continue doing the services even though you hadn't been paid?
Yes.
As a result of that agreement, did you have a particular title with the hospital?
I believe they may have called it medical director.
And what was your understanding of the duties of a medical director for UGH?
Objection form.
I'm unsure. That was a common terminology whenever you signed a call contract.
Had you ever been a medical director at any other hospital?
Yes.
What other hospitals had you been at this point in time in 2014? Had you been?
Texas General Hospital. I was also taking call as medical director for them.
Did they have at Texas General a agreement like the one you signed with University General regarding those services?
It was not exact, but they had an agreement.
Did it require you to provide surgical services like the UGH contract did?
I was on call for the ER for surgery.
What does it mean to be on call?
In my understanding, it is a 24-hour obligation. You are the surgeon on call for the emergency room. So if surgical issues arise through the emergency room, you are the first person of contact.
Now, if you're on call and a call comes in through the ER, do you have the discretion to take or refuse to take the patient?
Yes.
And what is that discretion based on?
Clinical judgment. Do I have the resources? Does the hospital have the resources to care for that patient?
In the course of working for UGH, did you ever refuse to take on a ER-related surgical call?
Yes.
How often did you do that?
I can recall one patient that I refused.
And what was the reason for refusing to take on that patient?
The patient had a GI bleed, and again, I felt the hospital didn't have the capabilities of managing that type of patient.
Do you know if that patient, what happened to that patient?
She was transferred from the ER to another hospital.
And what was it that you felt the hospital didn't have the capability to provide?
For that particular patient, that treatment is done through GI services typically, with multiple different types of procedures that can be done in that capacity, and that hospital did not have that.
So you refused the care of the ER patient with the GI bleed because you felt University General Hospital didn't have the capability to provide the GI services that patient needed?
Correct.
Was this before or after the care involved in Mrs. Maja's case?
I don't recall.
Any other patients you recall that while you were serving as the on-call surgical doctor for the hospital, you refused to take on, other than this one and Mrs. Maja?
I believe there may have been one other, but I may be getting my hospitals confused.
For this other patient, do you recall the reason why you refused to take on that patient?
The patient had common bile duct stones.
And what was it about the common bile duct stones that you felt was your basis for refusing to take on that patient?
That patient required a ERCP procedure, and the hospital did not have that.
To your knowledge, did UGH have that capability?
No, no,
You just can't remember whether it was UGH or some other hospital?
correct.
Had a patient come in with common bile duct stones, would that have been a patient that, in your opinion, UGH had the facilities to handle?
No, that patient would have got transferred.
All right. Now, Tim, I thought I had more copies. I only have one.
Can you tell me what you're...
Yeah, the physician's agreement. UGH, or I'm sorry, Hamilton 18 through 25.
Would you mind if I run down to my office and get my copy?
Sure, sure. I'm sorry. I thought I had more than one copy.
That's fine. And this was produced in response to,
Our request for production.
yeah, the supplemental responses.
Short answer is I don't know.
I believe
I got them from you.
I believe this is one that confidentiality clause issue.
Give me just a second.
You want to pause? Yeah.
Off the record at 1:40 p.m. Back on record, 1:41 p.m.
Okay, doctor, I want to show you Exhibit 4 and specifically page 6, which I tried to open there for you.
Okay.
Do you recognize that as your signature?
Yes.
Okay, is this the agreement for physician services that you signed with UGH?
Yes.
And does this date April 1st of 2014 track with your recollection as to when you started providing those services to UGH?
Yes.
If you go through on page 5, there's a section that talks about notices. At the top, it's paragraph numbered 16. Do you see that?
Yes. Oh, sorry.
It indicates where information is supposed to be sent, and for the physician, it lists Covenant Surgery Associates. Are you affiliated at all with Covenant Surgery Associates?
Yes.
In what capacity?
Co-owner.
Okay. Is that the correct address for Covenant Surgery Associates to receive notices, to your knowledge?
That is a mailing address.
Okay. Now, are you aware of any other agreements or contracts between yourself and anyone at UGH regarding your services there?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. We've got Exhibit 4. What I'm wondering about is if you're aware of any other agreements that are out there that describe your duties or your responsibilities with respect to your director of, or your medical director actions with UGH?
No.
It would be this document, Exhibit 4, correct?
Yes.
And what were you compensated for your services? How were you compensated?
It was supposed to be $500 a day.
Now, did this agreement set out the requirements that you had to follow with respect to the work you were doing for UGH?
Form.
I would say they're merely guidelines, not per se requirements.
Okay. Was there any agreement that you made with someone at UGH that's not in writing, that where they verbally outlined to you what the duties and obligations of a medical director for the hospital were?
No.
So for example, as we go through Exhibit 4, the second whereas paragraph, lawyers love the word whereas, you see that?
You said 4?
On Exhibit 4, the third paragraph down
okay.
starts whereas.
Okay.
Says UGHD desires to obtain the general surgery coverage services of physician for the hospital. You understood that this agreement required you to provide that kind of surgery services, true?
Objection form.
I understood that I was required to be general surgery for the emergency room.
Is there anything in this agreement, to your knowledge, that limits your services to emergency room only coverage?
I don't believe it states it specifically in this.
Because I've looked through it, I don't see emergency room ever even mentioned in this agreement. To your knowledge, is it in here somewhere, or is there some reason why you think that is part of this agreement?
Because I was asked to take call for the ER.
Okay. But are you aware of a limitation that says your work for University General under the agreement in Exhibit 4 was somehow just limited to emergency room only?
It does not appear to be in this agreement.
Okay. Are you aware of any verbal communication that someone gave you that limited this agreement to that aspect of your care, emergency room only?
That's the only thing that I discussed with the administration.
Okay.
Not responsible.
Was there someone at the administration that told you that your care as medical director for the hospital was limited to emergency room only?
And once again, I forget the name that recruited me. But I was asked, and he was one of the people through the administration to take call for the emergency room. They didn't have any staff to cover the emergency room, and that's what I agreed to verbally.
All right. You don't recall the individual that said that?
Well, the CEO knew because he was there. Chuck was there, and I don't recall the name of
Objection,
that.
not responsible.
Will Mr. Schutz be, if he's asked the question, Mr. Schutz, did you tell Dr. Hamilton her services as medical director were limited to emergency room surgical patients only? What would you expect his answer to be?
Oh, he didn't tell me that. He was there when the conversation was had.
Do you recall then the identity of the individual that you believe told you that your services as medical director were limited to the emergency room only?
He was the, at the time, the physician liaison, and he was over the ER call schedule at the time. So yeah.
And do you remember that individual's name?
No.
Do you remember what he looked like?
Yes, he was a Caucasian male, and I operated on his mother, and I can't think of the name right now.
Okay. All right, keep going with me in Exhibit 4 here. There's a Section 1 on that first page. Do you see that?
Yes, number 1.
Okay, it says, when I read it, it says General Surgery Recovery Services. Do you believe that was limited to just the emergency room patients or for the entire hospital?
I believe that was limited to the emergency room, but other physicians could consult me.
Okay. Now, as part of this, when you signed it, you understood you were to provide you were being retained rather by UGHD as an independent contractor to provide general surgery coverage services as the medical director. You understand that?
I did not know what medical director was in this sense, but yes.
Okay.
Objection, non-responsive.
You understood, though, that you were being retained by UGH to provide general surgery coverage as the hospital's medical director. True?
Form.
I understood I was to provide general surgery coverage.
Okay. And it says a little further here, and physician accepts such responsibility. You see that?
Yes.
Did you accept that responsibility?
Yes.
Form.
You just believed that that was limited only to emergency room patients. Is that correct?
Yes. That was my understanding.
Now, if you turn to the second page, I want to draw your attention to number 5. Do you see that?
Yes.
Compliance with standards. Again, nothing in here limits your compliance or your performance to just emergency room care. Is that true?
I do not see anything.
It does say that you shall perform all services and duties under this agreement in accord with the laws, rules, regulations, ordinances, and judicial and general surgery coverage interpretations thereof of the United States and the state of Texas, the city of Dallas. You see that?
I do see that.
Again, it says general surgery coverage. Do you believe that means only for emergency room patients?
It was my interpretation at the time.
Okay. And then it goes on to say, as well as UGHD's or the hospital's bylaws, medical staff bylaws, rules, regulations, guidelines, policies, and procedures. You see that?
Yes.
You agreed to follow those, true?
I agreed that those were guidelines.
But you agreed that you would perform your services along, in accordance rather, in strict accordance with those rules, bylaws, guidelines, policies, and procedures.
In most situations.
Objection.
In what situations did you not have to perform your services as a physician and as the medical director for UGH in strict accordance with the hospital's bylaws, medical staff bylaws, rules, regulations, guidelines, policies, and procedures?
Depends on patient situations where clinical judgment, I felt, in my opinion, if it overruled those bylaws, rules and regulations, guidelines, policies, and procedures.
Did you ever do that?
Not that I recall.
Okay. Turn to page 3, if you would. There's a paragraph at the top that says 10, duration and termination.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
And it says here, the first paragraph, or the first sentence on paragraph with a little a in parentheses says, this agreement shall continue in effect through March 31st, 2015, unless terminated sooner. You see that?
Yes.
It was your understanding and expectation that this agreement would continue until that date, true?
Yes.
Had you been given any notice that the written or verbal that the this agreement was not in effect back in June of 2014?
No.
Okay. Now I want to go to section, it's on Exhibit A, further down.
Okay.
Exhibit A is a section that's referenced in the body of the agreement, and it's titled Physician's Duties and Responsibilities. Do you see that?
Yes.
You agree with me that these are the duties and responsibilities you agreed to perform when you signed Exhibit 4, this agreement for physician services?
Form.
I agreed to follow them.
Now, is this section, which would pertain to what your duties and responsibilities were, limited in any way, shape, or form to just emergency room patients?
Form.
At the time, it was my understanding. I do not see it written here.
Okay.
Objection, non-responsive.
So would you agree with me that Exhibit A, which outlined your physician's duties and responsibilities as medical director of University General Hospital, Dallas, does not limit your work to emergency room patients only. Is that a true statement?
I would disagree. That was not my understanding.
Objection, non responsive.
Yeah, and let me join that objection. Here's my question, ma'am. Point out for me in Exhibit A of Exhibit 4 the sections you believe demonstrate that your services as medical director of the University General Hospital, Dallas, were limited to just emergency room patients.
I do not see it on Exhibit A.
Okay. You'd agree with me it's not there, true?
Yes, I do not see it.
Okay. By contrast, A says what? Can you read that for me?
Provide monthly call coverage on a 24-hour basis.
Is that limited at all to just emergency room care?
It was under my understanding.
Objection,
Yes.
non-responsive.
Okay. And then B, could you read that for me?
Assure adequate monitoring of hospitals' patients receiving general surgery coverage services at UGHD based upon established protocols, policies, and procedures.
Is that limited at all to emergency room patients?
I feel that was limited to my patients that I was providing general surgery coverage to.
Objection, non-responsive.
Well, let me ask you why you feel that way when the part that I read says assure adequate monitoring of hospitals possessive as patients. Do you interpret that to mean just your patients?
Yes, there's multiple surgeons there that had patients. I'm not responsible for their patient when I'm on call.
Okay. C, what does it mean to facilitate communications among physicians who admit patients to University General Hospital, Dallas for general surgery services?
I'm not sure.
With respect to a patient undergoing a laparoscopic cholecystectomy, would that be something that falls under emergency care or general surgery care?
Form.
I think it depends.
On what?
The patient.
In this
There's-
case, Mrs. Major, do you believe that she was receiving general surgical care or emergency care?
General surgery.
Why do you feel like Mrs. Major was receiving general surgery care as opposed to emergency care?
And this is from peer review.
Well, again, I don't want to ask you about peer
Oh.
review. Independent of peer review, why do you believe Mrs. Major was receiving general surgical care rather than emergency care?
Then I
If
cannot
you
answer.
can't answer the question because it's all, your impressions are only formed by what you saw in peer review or reviewed in peer review, then you can't answer the question.
Yeah, then I can't answer.
Okay. And if I were to ask you what the duty and responsibility of facilitating communications among physicians who admit patients to the University General Hospital, Dallas for general surgery services, can you give me an example of what that means or explain to me what that duty and responsibility actually means?
It would just be my understanding that if there was a patient who required general surgery, then the admitting doctor and the general surgeon would communicate the issues.
If you had a concern that a hospital patient required or potentially required care that the hospital was not equipped or capable of providing, would that be a communication that you would feel you have a duty or responsibility to make to the physicians who had admitted the patient?
Form.
That would be a potential communication.
I mean, because in this case, when you first got the call from Dr. Shade, the description of her condition made you concerned enough that you were uncomfortable about taking her care at all, correct?
Correct.
And you were concerned enough that you didn't want to take on her care because you thought she should be transferred to another facility, correct?
For multiple reasons, correct.
Did you tell Dr. Shade that?
I didn't get a chance to.
Did you tell any other doctor that?
I didn't speak with any other doctors.
Did you pick up the phone and call the critical care doctor and say, hey, in my opinion, Mrs. Major should be at a different facility where they can care for her?
I didn't have access to those doctors,
You
nor
did
did I know who the doctors were.
You did call the ICU nurse, correct?
Yes.
Did you tell the ICU nurse, hey, Mrs. Major needs to be transferred to a different facility that can care for her?
I mentioned, sounds like this patient needs to be transferred.
Okay, when you say you mentioned, what do you mean?
Just that.
Can
When
you-
we spoke, I said, sounds like this patient needs to be transferred. And actually, I did say that to Dr. Sade on our second conversation.
Okay. All right,
And
we
the
haven't gotten
CEO.
into the second
Oh, okay,
conversation yet,
sorry.
so I'll make a note. That's the 4:15.
Yes.
I'm going to skip number D.
Okay.
I want to go to E. Did you ever, as medical director for University General Hospital Dallas, review and approve incident reports?
No.
Did you ever assist in investigations? I'm not asking you about the substance of them or what they were, but did you ever carry out that role?
No.
I want to skip F. I want to go to, well, let me ask you about F. Did you ever carry out that duty and responsibility in any way, shape, or form?
No.
Same question for G. Did you ever participate in or comply with a company's corporate compliance plan?
No.
Did you do anything with regard to duty H, promote the community and physicians' awareness of the facility's general surgery coverage?
Yes.
What did you do in that regard?
We went marketing to primary care doctors in the area.
Okay. Now, what's an activity report?
An activity report is essentially stating the hours I worked, the day, and potential operations or admissions.
It's one of the duties under Exhibit 4, the agreement that you have with UGH, to prepare those types of reports. Is that correct? For your actions?
I believe it was.
And in Exhibit B, which is the next page from where we were, there's a blank thing that just says activity report form. It's a big blank page, so form appears to be a blank page. Had you ever seen an actual form for this?
No.
Did you use any kind of actual form to perform this type of note-taking or record-keeping?
Just almost like a square with boxes. Put the date, the hour.
Do you recall filling out something like that for the month of June of 2014?
Probably. I would fill it out almost after my shifts to submit for payment, almost like a timesheet.
For the time that you were there, did you receive calls for consults at home or outside of being physically present in the hospital on other patients?
When I was on call?
Starting, yeah, from when you were in April of 2014 up through the time when this agreement with University General ended, did you provide consultation or work where you responded to a call from the hospital or someone at the hospital about a patient and discussed a patient or got involved in the patient's care?
Yes.
How did you account for that type of activity when you did it with respect to the activity report form?
I don't think I did.
Were you required at all, if you took a phone call at home for a consult or some other activity, to make any kind of time notation about the time associated or the patient associated?
No.
Would the activity report form reflect any of your actions if we were to get it for June of 2014? Would that report form reflect any of the activities that we've been talking about with respect to Mrs. Major?
No.
Do you recall having seen any other patients that day, June 27th of 2014?
I do not recall the specifics of a patient.
Do you recall whether you had a full patient load given your status being
I purposely did not, but I did round on June 27th because I was at the hospital before I got the call. So I was at UGH rounding on a patient or two.
Would the activity report for that day reflect those types of rounding?
No, it just really reports the day that I took call. It didn't go into specifics.
Okay. Now, let me show you Exhibit 5. And I know we don't have the email, but is this the bylaw that was sent to you when you asked Ms. Cleveland for the bylaws?
Honestly, I can't. I wouldn't be able to say exactly.
This has been produced to us by the hospital as the bylaws that pertain to transferring the care of a patient from one doctor to another.
Okay.
Have you ever seen this document before?
I cannot recall I cannot recall.
With respect to it, going back to Exhibit 4, would you agree with me that the physician's agreement when you became the medical director of University General Hospital required you to follow the hospital's staff rules and regulations?
Yes.
And if this in Exhibit 5 is what it's been represented to me to be one of University General Hospital's medical staff rules and regulations, would you agree with me you were responsible for following it?
Form.
I would say they were guidelines for me to follow.
Okay. Did you have at the time an alternate doctor that would cover for you if you were unavailable or couldn't be at the hospital to care for one of your own patients?
Yes.
Who was your alternate?
Dr. Alexander.
And what is Dr. Alexander's relationship to you, if any?
A partner.
At Covenant, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Form.
Yes.
Withdraw the objection. Excuse me.
And with respect to that, is he still a partner with you?
Yes.
How long have you been partners with Dr. Alexander?
A year and a half.
And did Dr. Alexander have any relationship with University General Hospital like your own in Exhibit 4, where he was retained to provide any kind of services for the hospital, to your knowledge?
Form.
Yes.
What was the agreement he had?
The same.
The same as what you have essentially in Exhibit 4, correct?
Yes. We alternated.
Were you both considered to be medical directors of University General Hospital, Dallas?
I believe
General
so.
surgery. With respect to when we're looking at Exhibit 5, I want to draw your attention on the first page. There's a section titled 1.6. Do you see that?
Yes.
Can you read the very last sentence of 1.6 for me?
In the case the alternate is not available or has not been appointed, the CEO or the chief of staff shall have the authority to call any other member of the staff to attend the patient.
Okay. Had you read that bylaw before today?
Yes.
When did you first read that bylaw?
I don't recall.
Do you believe this section was in effect back in June of 2014?
Form.
I am unsure.
In other words, is there anything about this that you look at it and say, hey, this looks different than what I remember the way things were back in June of 2014?
Form.
I can't recall word for word.
All right. Section 1.6, if I'm understanding it correctly, requires each practitioner, which would include you, true? If you're a practitioner working at the hospital?
Requires what? I'm sorry.
Well, 1.6 requires each practitioner to name another member of the staff as an alternate. You see that?
That was under my understanding. I was verbally told that.
Okay. And that's what it actually says right here. Each practitioner shall name another member of the staff as an alternate to be called to attend their patients in an emergency. What does that mean to you?
It means that you need to have someone that covers you.
What does it mean if that person is called to cover for you?
It means that they would take care of my patients as in my absence. Mm.
Okay, then it goes on. It says, in an emergency, when the attending practitioner is not available or until the attending practitioner can be present. What does that mean to you?
For example, on maternity leave, he took over all of my patients.
Okay. Then it goes on, in the case of a medical emergency, the designated alternate shall be called. Do you see that?
Yes.
What does that mean to you?
If I'm unavailable for one of my patients emergently, they call my partner.
Okay. So that would be if you were, when you were in the lead up to being a mother, if something had happened to you, your alternate was Dr. Alexander, and whether you were being rushed to your OB-GYN's office or homesick or whatever the reason was, the alternate, in this case Dr. Anderson, would be required to come in to care for your patients. True?
Dr. Alexander, I don't know if he'd be required to come in, but he would be my alternate and could be called upon to cover me.
Okay. And then what would happen if Dr. Alexander couldn't be found or couldn't come in?
I'm not sure.
Well, let's look at the last sentence. What does it say?
In the case the alternate is not available or has not been appointed, the CEO or the chief of staff shall have the authority to call any other member of the staff to attend the patient.
Okay. What does it mean to attend the patient?
It could mean multiple things. I'm not sure what it means here.
Well, what do you believe attend the patient means within the context of the agreement in the rules and regulations for the hospital where you were the medical director?
It could mean to be asked to see the patient, to consult on the patient, to give opinion on the patient, multiple meanings.
Is there something in this particular section that you believe gives the, well, let me back up. Do you know who Dr. Bianco's alternate was?
No.
Do you know if there was an alternate available other than yourself for Dr. Bianco?
I'm not sure.
Do you know if there had been an alternate for Dr. Bianco appointed by anyone?
I'm not sure.
So if there wasn't an alternate available or one appointed, again, the next part is the CEO or chief of staff. Do you see that?
Yes.
The CEO at the time, was that Mr. Schutz?
Yes.
The chief of staff at the time, was that Dr. Schade?
Yes.
Says, so we can insert Dr. Schade for chief of staff. Dr. Schade shall have the authority to call any other member of the staff. Do you see that?
Yes.
Were you a member of the staff?
Yes.
Did Dr. Schade have the authority to call you to attend the patient?
He can request. I see the patient. I do not have to accept.
And what part of this says that you don't have to accept?
In my understanding, a physician does not have to accept the patient if they don't feel like they have the resources or the hospital has the resources.
Objection, non-responsive.
Well, let me ask you to turn to first page 6 of 12.
Okay. Okay.
And subhead is 3. It says in bold, general conduct of care.
Okay.
You see that?
Yes.
And this, as I understand it from reading through the document, sets out the rules and regulations for University General Hospital staff members for their general conduct of care. Do you believe that to be the case as well?
I believe they'd be guidelines.
Okay. And then I want you to turn to page 8 of 12, a couple more in.
Okay.
We're still talking about conduct of care. It's a number 3 point whatever. That's that same section. You see that?
Yes.
Because number 4 is community disaster plan. I don't want to talk to you about that. You see that?
Yes, I see number 4.
Look at section 3.12.
Okay.
Read along with me. In the absence of the physician, when no alternative call coverage has been arranged, the chairman of the department shall have the authority to call on any member of the medical staff to assume care of the patient until another physician is available. Do you see that?
Yes.
Would that be a rule and regulation that would have pertained to you back in June of 2014 as a medical director for University General Hospital?
It's a guideline.
Okay. Would you agree with me that the chair of a department has the authority, or had back then in June of 2014, the authority to call on any member of the medical staff to assume care of the patient until another physician is available?
That's what it says here.
What does it mean to assume care of the patient?
I believe that term in this sense would mean to assume care, take over the care.
Do you believe, or do you recall when Dr. Sade said that the bylaws gave him the power, the authority to call on any member of the medical staff to assume the care of Mrs. Major, the patient, that he was referencing section 3.12 here on page 8?
He could have been.
And did you point out to him within Exhibit 5 any section that says, while it says the chair of the department has the authority to call on any member of the medical staff, that didn't apply to you unless you chose to?
I felt like his decision didn't supersede my clinical judgment or my comfort level.
What other surgeons were available, to your knowledge, at University General Hospital to provide this care if you refused to do it?
I know the hospital had a chief of surgery.
Who was that?
I'm not sure. I know they had one, and I know there were other general surgeons that had staff privileges at University of General Hospital.
Were there any other members of University General Hospital that were employed, kind of like what you have with Dr. Alexander and yourself, in a written agreement like we see in Exhibit 4 to provide general surgery coverage to the hospital?
I don't know the specific names, but I know they had other people taking call.
Do you know how many other people?
No.
Do you know any other person that was taking call back in June of 2014 for general surgery coverage other than yourself and Dr. Alexander?
I knew Dr. Bianco was taking call.
Okay. Anyone other than those three?
Not off the top of my head.
Mike, we need to stop and point our music.
Give me 2 seconds, because I thought I had it right in front of me. There it is. Let me show you real quick before we take a break. Exhibit 6, which is UGH 0358. And I just wanted to ask you, do you know what that is?
This looks like a call schedule for June.
And if we look on it for the 27th of June, whose name is there?
Dr. Hamilton.
Do you know who that is?
It's myself.
And there's a phone number it's crossed through, but do you recognize the 210 phone number that's there?
Yes.
Whose number is that?
That's my cell phone number.
Okay. Let's take a quick break for Eric.
Off the record, 2:16 p.m.